They didn't whisper when she walked out. They chuckled. It wasn't loud laughter. It was worse than that. Controlled. Confident. The kind of sound people make when they believe the story has already ended and they're just waiting for the credits to roll. Naomi Brooks stepped through the heavy courthouse doors with nothing but a thin envelope tucked under her arm and a paper bag clenched in her hand. The bag had softened from use, the corners rounded down by weeks of carrying everything she owned. Inside it were folded documents, a cracked phone with no service, and a pair of shoes she hadn't worn yet because she was saving them for when things turned around. The late morning air of downtown Chicago hit her face like a reminder she hadn't asked for. Wind coming off the lake. Sharp. Unforgiving. It slipped through the seams of her coat and settled against her spine. Behind her, the laughter lingered. Not from strangers. From people who had known her name once. People who had toasted her at private dinners. People who had shaken her hand, kissed her cheek, called her family. Now they leaned against the marble railing outside the courtroom, relaxed, satisfied, watching her descend the steps as if she were leaving a stage she no longer belonged on. Naomi didn't look back. She had learned early that turning around only gave people permission to finish what they'd started. Inside courtroom 6B, the air was still buzzing. Not with tension anymore. That had passed. This was the afterglow of victory. The kind that made people careless. Malcolm Brooks remained seated at the long table near the front, his jacket still buttoned, one arm draped easily across the back of his chair. He looked unbothered, relieved, almost bored. His leg bounced once, not from nerves, but from impatience. This chapter of his life was supposed to be over now. Beside him, his mother leaned in close, her voice low but animated, already discussing what came next. Where he'd stay, which connections would still answer his calls, how quickly things could be cleaned up. Across the aisle, their attorney was packing his briefcase with precise, unhurried movements. No rush, no stress, no fear of missing anything important. He'd done what he came to do. They had taken the house. They had frozen the accounts. They had stripped the marriage down to dates and signatures and technicalities that left no room for sentiment. And Naomi Brooks had walked out with nothing. That was the story everyone believed. In the hallway, reporters lingered, but they didn't bother chasing her. They had already gotten what they wanted earlier. Photos of Malcolm leaving the courtroom calm and composed. A quote about moving forward. A narrative neat enough to print without questions. Naomi slipped past them unnoticed, her steps steady, her face unreadable. If she felt anything, it didn't show. Hunger had a way of sanding emotion down to something quiet and manageable. Fear did the same. Outside, the laughter finally faded behind her, replaced by traffic and wind and the low hum of a city that didn't care who won or lost inside its buildings. She walked 2 blocks before stopping. A bus roared past, spraying grit across the sidewalk. Naomi adjusted her grip on the bag and checked the envelope under her arm, as if it might disappear if she didn't. It was thin, too thin for comfort, too thin for closure. People passing her saw what they expected to see. A woman in her early 30s. Tired eyes. Cheap coat. The posture of someone recently corrected by authority. No jewelry. No purse. No car waiting at the curb. Someone who had miscalculated. That assumption followed her like a shadow. She turned onto a quieter street, the kind lined with office buildings that emptied out early in the afternoon. Glass fronts. Locked doors. Reflections that showed her exactly as the world wanted to see her, smaller than she'd been before. Naomi stopped again, this time in front of a long, narrow window that reflected the sky between buildings. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing. Inside the courthouse, the judge was still seated. Judge Harold Whitaker had not risen immediately after Naomi left the room. He had remained behind the bench, scanning the final documents with an expression that hadn't changed much during the hearing. Neutral, professional, detached. But something about the file in front of him had slowed him down. The courtroom had been full when proceedings began. Quiet at first. Curious. Watching. Malcolm Brooks was not a celebrity, but his name carried weight in certain circles. Finance, real estate, boardrooms where influence traveled faster than reputation. Naomi had sat alone at the defense table. No family beside her. No expensive counsel whispering reassurance. No visible support. Her attorney, a court-appointed man with graying hair and a suit that had seen too many years, had done his job carefully, methodically. He had spoken when required. objected when necessary, never once raised his voice. It had looked like a formality. Malcolm's side had done most of the talking. They spoke of contribution, of assets, of timelines and valuations, of how short the marriage had been, of how little Naomi had brought in and how much she had taken out. They spoke as if she were an expense that had finally been written off. Naomi had listened, hands folded, eyes lowered, the picture of someone already resigned to the outcome. When the ruling came, it landed exactly where everyone expected it to. Limited support, immediate separation of remaining assets, no claim to future earnings. The gavel fell softly. Malcolm's mother exhaled like a woman who had been holding her breath for months. And Naomi stood, nodded once, and walked out. That was the moment people laughed. They laughed because they thought silence meant defeat. They didn't see the way Judge Whittaker's eyes had lingered on the paperwork after she left. They didn't notice the way his hand paused over the final page, fingers pressing into the edge as if grounding himself. He reached for the sealed addendum that had been submitted that morning, almost as an afterthought. The courtroom had emptied enough that the sound of paper was loud when he broke the seal. Judge Whittaker adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. The document inside was brief, clinical, no dramatic language, no explanation beyond what was required. But the name printed across the top made him stop breathing for a second longer than usual. Back on the street, Naomi Brooks resumed walking. She didn't rush. She didn't drag her feet either. Each step landed where it needed to, like she was counting them without looking down. At the corner, she waited for the light to change, her reflection faint in the glass of a closed storefront. Her face was calm, not proud, not angry, just composed. The envelope under her arm was warm now from the heat of her body. When the signal changed, she crossed. Behind her, inside the courthouse, Judge Whittaker called for the clerk. His voice was measured, low, but there was something new in it, a tightness that hadn't been there earlier. "Bring Ms. Brooks back," he said. The clerk hesitated. "Your Honor, the ruling." "I'm aware," the judge replied. "Bring her back." By the time the clerk reached the hallway, Naomi Brooks was already halfway down the block, and everyone who had laughed believed the story was over. They had no idea it hadn't even started yet. Naomi Brooks was already 2 stops onto the bus before the clerk found her. The bus smelled like damp coats and old paper. People sat spaced apart, eyes forward, lives contained in small private silences. Naomi stood near the back, one hand wrapped around a pole, the other holding the paper bag low against her thigh. The envelope was still tucked under her arm, flattened now, as if the weight of the courthouse had followed her out and pressed itself into the paper. She didn't expect to be followed. That was the part everyone got wrong about humiliation. Once people believe they've finished breaking you, they stop paying attention. The bus lurched forward again, tires groaning as it pulled away from the curb. Naomi shifted her weight automatically. Her body still knew how to move through systems even when the rest of her life felt stripped down to essentials. She was thinking about where she would get off. Not home. There was no home anymore. The apartment keys were gone. The locks had been changed before she even finished packing. The storage unit was paid for 1 more week. After that, everything depended on timing. She was thinking about timing when someone said her name. Ms. Brooks. It came from behind her, cautious and unsure, like the speaker wasn't convinced she would respond. Naomi turned slowly. The man standing near the rear door was younger than she expected. Late 20s, maybe. Court staff. His badge was tucked under his jacket, but the posture gave him away. Straight spine. Nervous eyes. Someone who didn't usually interrupt strangers on public transit. "Yes," she said. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. I work for Judge Whittaker. He asked me to bring you back." Naomi studied him for a moment. People learn things about you quickly when they thought you had nothing. Their voices changed. Their posture shifted. They over-explained, or they softened, or they rushed. This clerk was doing all 3 at once. "Back where?" she asked. "The courtroom. There's an issue with the record." Naomi's grip tightened on the pole. She had expected many things walking out of that courthouse. Hunger. Cold. The long ache of being erased. She had not expected to be called back. "What kind of issue?" she asked. The clerk swallowed. "I don't know, ma'am. I was just told to find you." The bus slowed, brakes hissing. Naomi glanced toward the front, then back at the clerk. People nearby were pretending not to listen. They always did. She nodded once. "All right." The bus doors opened with a sigh. Naomi stepped off without looking back, the clerk following close behind. As the bus pulled away, the city resumed its indifferent rhythm. Naomi adjusted the envelope under her arm and turned toward the courthouse she had just left, its stone facade rising out of the street like nothing had happened inside. The walk back felt longer. Every step carried the memory of laughter, the echo of shoes on marble, the way Malcolm's mother had smiled without looking at her, already rearranging the future. Naomi didn't rush. If something was about to happen, it would happen at its own pace. Power never hurried. Inside, the courthouse felt different. Quieter. Thinner. The crowd had dispersed. Reporters were gone. The energy that had fueled the morning's spectacle had evaporated, leaving behind polished floors and fluorescent lights and the hum of machines doing their jobs without opinion. They passed security again without comment. The clerk led her down the same hallway she'd walked earlier, past the same doors, past the same benches. Everything looked identical, and yet the air felt charged now, like a room after a storm. When they reached courtroom 6B, the doors were closed. The clerk knocked once, then opened them. Judge Whittaker was still seated. Malcolm Brooks was not. Neither was his mother. Only the judge, the court reporter, and Naomi's attorney remained. Naomi paused at the threshold. Her attorney looked up first. His expression changed when he saw her. Surprise flickered, then something else. Curiosity edged with caution. Judge Whittaker lifted his gaze. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "thank you for returning." Naomi stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The sound echoed softly. "You asked for me," she said. "Yes." The judge gestured toward the defense table. "Please, have a seat." Naomi didn't sit right away. She stood where she was, the envelope still tucked under her arm, the paper bag hanging from her hand. Her posture was straight, unassuming, watchful. "I was under the impression the matter was concluded," she said. "So was I," Judge Whittaker replied, "until I reviewed the supplemental filing." Naomi's attorney straightened in his chair. "With respect, Your Honor," he said carefully, "the supplemental filing was submitted prior to the hearing." "I'm aware," the judge said. "I did not have occasion to examine it fully until now." He reached down and lifted a document from the bench. Naomi recognized the envelope immediately. It was identical to the one under her arm. Her attorney had submitted it without ceremony. No speech, no emphasis, just paper, filed on time, placed where it belonged. The judge tapped the page lightly. "This document states that Ms. Naomi Brooks is not her legal name." Naomi's attorney nodded once. "That is correct, Your Honor." The judge looked back at Naomi. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "would you like to clarify for the record?" Naomi inhaled slowly. This was the moment. Not the kind that came with noise or applause or righteous speeches. The kind that arrived quietly, after people had already made up their minds. "Yes," she said, "I would." She walked to the defense table and set the paper bag down beside the chair. The sound it made was soft, almost apologetic. She slid the envelope from under her arm and placed it on the table. "My legal name," she said, "is Naomi Brooks Ellison." The room went still. Judge Whittaker didn't react right away. He glanced down at the document in his hand, then back up at her. "Ellison," he repeated. "Yes." The court reporter's fingers paused above the keys. Naomi's attorney leaned back slightly, folding his hands. Judge Whittaker turned a page. "For the record," he said, "this filing includes a certified birth record, trust documentation, and confirmation of beneficiary status." He stopped reading. "Ms. Brooks Ellison," he said slowly, "are you the sole surviving heir of the Ellison Holdings Trust?" Naomi met his gaze. "Yes, Your Honor." Silence pressed down on the room. Not shock, not disbelief. Recognition. Judge Whittaker removed his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose once, a small, human gesture, then replaced them carefully. "The Ellison Trust," he said, almost to himself, "predates most of the institutions in this city." Naomi said nothing. She had learned long ago that wealth spoken aloud lost its weight. "Why?" the judge asked, looking at her now. "Was this information not disclosed earlier?" Naomi's expression didn't change. "Because I wasn't required to," she said. "And because I chose not to." Her attorney nodded. "The trust is private," he added. "It does not appear on standard financial disclosures." Ms. Brooks Ellison entered the marriage under her personal name and finances only. Judge Whittaker leaned back in his chair. "And during the marriage," he said, "she did not draw from the trust?" "No," Naomi said. I lived on my income, which was listed as administrative support, she said, and unpaid labor. The judge's jaw tightened slightly. He glanced toward the empty plaintiff's table. How long? He asked. Was Mr. Brooks aware of your full identity? Naomi didn't hesitate. He wasn't. Her attorney added. My client disclosed her background as she chose. There was no fraud, no misrepresentation in any legal sense. Judge Whittaker exhaled slowly. In other words, he said, Mr. Brooks believed he was divorcing a woman with no leverage. Naomi's attorney didn't smile. That appears to be the case. The judge sat in silence for several seconds. Outside the courtroom, the building hummed. Elevators moved. Papers shuffled. Lives continued. Inside, something fundamental shifted. Judge Whittaker reached for his pen. Ms. Brooks Ellison, he said, I am vacating the asset ruling effective immediately. Naomi's attorney straightened. The court will reconvene, the judge continued, with full disclosure from both parties. He looked up. And Ms. Brooks Ellison, he added, your husband and his counsel will be returning to this room. Naomi felt it then. Not triumph, not relief, just the subtle, unmistakable sense of gravity changing direction. Yes, Your Honor, she said. Judge Whittaker pressed the intercom button on his bench. Clerk, he said, please notify Mr. Brooks and counsel that the court requires their immediate presence. He released the button and looked back at Naomi. Ms. Brooks Ellison, he said quietly, you may want to remain seated. Naomi sat. She folded her hands in her lap. And for the first time since she walked into that courthouse, she allowed herself to look at the empty chair where Malcolm Brooks had been sitting just minutes earlier. It already felt like it belonged to someone else. Malcolm Brooks returned to courtroom 6B with the confidence of a man who believed the worst had already happened. He didn't hurry. That alone told Naomi everything she needed to know about how completely he misunderstood the situation. He walked in laughing quietly at something his attorney had said, jacket still buttoned, shoulders loose, posture relaxed. The same posture he had worn all morning. The posture of someone who expected procedure, not consequence. His mother followed a step behind him, chin lifted, eyes sharp, scanning the room with practiced dismissal. She had already begun rearranging the narrative in her mind. This recall was an inconvenience, nothing more. A clerical delay, a chance for the judge to clean up language or clarify a line item. Malcolm slid back into his chair without looking at Naomi. He didn't need to. In his mind, she had already been removed. Your Honor, his attorney began smoothly. We were informed there was a procedural. Sit, Judge Whittaker said. The word landed without volume. But it landed. Malcolm stopped mid-motion and lowered himself into the chair. His attorney did the same, slower now, eyes narrowing slightly as he sensed the shift in the room. Judge Whittaker did not look at Malcolm. He looked at the file in front of him. Mr. Brooks, the judge said, I want to clarify something for the record. Yes, Your Honor, Malcolm replied easily. You stated earlier, the judge continued, that your wife brought no assets into the marriage. That's correct, Malcolm said. She had no accounts, no property, no investments. We verified. Answer only what I ask, Judge Whittaker said. Malcolm's smile thinned. Yes, Your Honor. The judge turned a page. You also stated, he went on, that she had no family support, no inheritance, no external financial leverage. That was accurate, Malcolm said. To my knowledge. Judge Whittaker finally looked up. To your knowledge, he repeated. Yes. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind. Not the expectant kind. The deliberate kind. Naomi watched Malcolm shift slightly in his chair, his leg bouncing once before he stilled it. His mother leaned closer, whispering something under her breath. His attorney straightened a stack of papers that did not need straightening. Judge Whittaker removed his glasses and set them on the bench. Mr. Brooks, he said, are you familiar with the Ellison Holdings Trust? The room changed. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Malcolm blinked. Once. Then again. He paused. I'm aware of the name, Your Honor. Of course you are, the judge said. It would be difficult to operate in your field and not be. Naomi did not move. Her presence in the room had altered the geometry of the space. She felt it now, the way gravity feels when it shifts without warning. Judge Whittaker gestured toward the defense table. Please stand, Ms. Brooks Ellison. Naomi stood. Her chair made a soft sound against the floor. No one else moved. State your full legal name for the record, the judge said. Naomi Renee Brooks Ellison, she replied. The court reporter's fingers resumed their steady rhythm. Malcolm turned. It was not a sharp movement. It was slow, mechanical, like his body was buying time for his mind to catch up. Ellison. The name echoed in his head without context at first, like a word in a language he half recognized. Then meaning rushed in all at once. His mother's breath hitched audibly. That's not, she began, then stopped herself. Judge Whitaker continued. For clarity, he said, the Ellison Holdings Trust currently controls interests across multiple states, including Illinois, Michigan, New York, and California. Malcolm's attorney leaned forward. Your Honor, he said carefully, we were not made aware. You were not required to be, the judge replied. Malcolm's mouth opened slightly. Naomi watched the color drain from his face, not all at once, but in stages. First confusion, then calculation, then the dawning awareness that the room was no longer on his side. Judge Whitaker lifted another document. This trust, he said, was established prior to Ms. Brooks Ellison's birth. It is independent of marital assets and legally protected. He paused. And it appears, he added, that your filings failed to account for that. Malcolm stood abruptly. That's not fair, he said, voice rising despite himself. She hid this. She lied by omission. That has to count for something. Naomi remained standing. She did not turn toward him. Judge Whitaker raised a hand. Sit, he said. Malcolm hesitated, then sat. You were not defrauded, the judge continued. You were uninformed. There's a difference, Malcolm said, more sharply now. She let me believe that she was smaller than you. Judge Whitaker finished. The words cut cleanly. Naomi's attorney shifted slightly in his chair, but said nothing. Mr. Brooks, the judge said, your belief does not determine reality. Silence returned, this time heavier. Judge Whitaker adjusted his glasses again. Now, he said, let's address contribution. He turned toward Naomi. Ms. Brooks Ellison, he asked, during the early years of your marriage, did you provide operational support to your husband's business ventures? Yes, Naomi said. In what capacity? She answered calmly. Administrative oversight, financial reconciliation, contract review, scheduling, strategic planning. Malcolm laughed. It came out sharp and brittle. She's exaggerating, he said. She helped, sure, but she wasn't. Did she work without compensation? The judge asked. Malcolm hesitated. She didn't need to, he said. I supported her. Naomi finally looked at him. Just once. Not with anger. With clarity. I declined compensation, she said, because I believed we were building together. The judge nodded slowly. And during that period, he said, did your business show growth? Yes, Malcolm said. But that was my answer, yes or no, the judge said. Yes. Judge Whitaker set the document down. Then we will reopen asset evaluation, he said. Effective immediately. Malcolm's attorney rose. Your Honor, he said, this is highly irregular. No, the judge replied. It's corrective. He looked directly at Malcolm. You proceeded under the assumption that your wife was powerless, he said. That assumption informed your strategy. Malcolm clenched his jaw. Judge Whitaker leaned forward slightly. You were wrong. Naomi felt it then. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Finality beginning to take shape. Judge Whitaker continued. This court will require a full accounting of marital benefit derived from Ms. Brooks Ellison's labor, he said, including indirect contributions. Malcolm's mother spoke then, her voice tight. This is ridiculous, she said. We treated her well. We gave her a life she never would have had. The judge looked at her. Mrs. Brooks, he said, this court does not recognize gratitude as currency. Naomi's attorney finally stood. Your Honor, he said, we would also like to submit a request for forensic review of pre-separation financial activity. Malcolm's head snapped up. What, he said. The attorney continued calmly. Specifically, asset transfers initiated within 60 days of filing. The courtroom went quiet again. Malcolm's attorney turned slowly toward him. You moved money? He asked under his breath. Malcolm didn't answer. Judge Whitaker tapped his pen once against the bench. This court, he said, does not respond well to concealment. Naomi watched Malcolm shrink in his seat, not physically, but internally. His posture changed. His shoulders drew inward. His confidence evaporated, replaced by something raw and exposed. This was identity collapse, and it had nothing to do with money. Judge Whittaker stood. "We will recess," he said. "When we return, this court will proceed with full disclosure." He paused. "And Mr. Brooks," he added, "you would be wise to listen carefully." The gavel struck. Not loud, not dramatic, but decisive. As everyone stood, Naomi remained still for a moment longer. She looked at Malcolm. He did not look back. His mother leaned close, whispering urgently now. His attorney was already on his phone, face tight. Naomi gathered her envelope and paper bag. She did not rush. She did not linger. She walked past them without a word, her footsteps soft against the floor. For the first time since this began, Malcolm felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not fear, irrelevance. And he had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The hallway outside courtroom 6B felt smaller than it had an hour earlier. Not physically, psychologically. Malcolm Brooks leaned against the wall near the water fountain, his jacket finally unbuttoned, tie loosened just enough to suggest strain. People passed him without stopping. Clerks, attorneys, security. No one made eye contact. Not out of courtesy, out of recalibration. He had been important that morning. That importance was now under review. His attorney stood a few feet away, phone pressed to his ear, voice lowered but sharp. He spoke in clipped phrases, nodding as if someone on the other end was delivering bad news he already suspected. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked toward Malcolm, then away again, like a man gauging whether the patient in front of him was still worth saving. Malcolm's mother sat rigidly on a bench, purse clutched in both hands. Her lips moved silently, rehearsing explanations that no longer had an audience. She had always believed authority came from certainty, from being louder than the room, from correcting people before they questioned you. But authority had shifted, and she could feel it. Naomi Brooks Ellison sat alone near the far window. She had chosen the seat deliberately, not out of habit, but instinct. It placed her in shadow, backlit by pale daylight filtering through frosted glass. Anyone looking at her would have to squint. Anyone speaking to her would have to step closer. She set the paper bag at her feet and rested her hands lightly on her knees. Still, unbothered, her attorney approached her quietly and sat beside her. "They're scrambling," he said under his breath. Naomi nodded once. "They always do when they realize they misread the map." He glanced at her. "You okay?" "Yes." It was the truth. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel relieved. What she felt was alignment. Like a bone that had been out of place for too long finally settling back where it belonged. Across the hall, Malcolm noticed the two of them talking. Something twisted in his chest. Not jealousy, not anger, confusion. For 3 years, he had believed Naomi needed him. That her quietness was dependency. That her refusal to argue was weakness. That her comfort with being overlooked meant she had nowhere else to stand. Now she sat calmly while his world fractured. And it made no sense. The courtroom doors opened. The clerk's voice cut through the hallway. "All parties, please return." Malcolm pushed himself off the wall and straightened his jacket, a reflex he'd practiced for decades. His mother rose as well, chin lifted, spine stiff, armor reassembled. Naomi stood last. She picked up the paper bag, slid the envelope back under her arm, and followed her attorney inside without looking at anyone else. Courtroom 6B was quieter than before. Not empty. Focused. The judge took his seat and surveyed the room. His gaze lingered on Malcolm, then moved on. "This court," Judge Whittaker said, "will proceed with disclosure." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Mr. Brooks," he continued, "you will answer questions directly. Counsel will intervene only when appropriate." Malcolm swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge turned to Naomi's attorney. "You may begin." The attorney stood, smoothing his jacket. "Mr. Brooks," he said evenly, "in the 60 days prior to filing for divorce, did you authorize any transfers exceeding 5 figures?" Malcolm hesitated. His attorney started to speak. Judge Whittaker lifted a hand. "He'll answer." Malcolm cleared his throat. "Yes." "To where?" "A holding entity." "Name?" Malcolm's jaw tightened. "I don't recall the exact." "Answer," the judge said. "Southlake Advisory," Malcolm said. Naomi's attorney nodded. "And who controls Southlake Advisory?" "It's an investment vehicle." That wasn't the question. Malcolm exhaled sharply. "I do." There it was. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Not loud, just enough. Were marital funds used in that transfer? The attorney asked. Yes. Malcolm's mother leaned forward. That money was his, she snapped. He earned it. The judge did not look at her. Under Illinois law, Naomi's attorney said, earnings during marriage are subject to review. Malcolm's attorney rose. Your Honor. Sit, Judge Whitaker said. The word landed harder this time. Naomi watched Malcolm's shoulders sink slightly as he complied. The attorney continued. Mr. Brooks, did you inform Ms. Brooks Ellison of this transfer? No. Did you disclose it in your initial filings? No. Why not? Malcolm's voice dropped. Because I didn't think I had to. The silence that followed was thick. Judge Whitaker made a note. And why? Naomi's attorney went on. Did you move those funds when you did? Malcolm's eyes flicked toward Naomi for the first time. She was watching him now. Not intently. Not expectantly. Simply present. Because, Malcolm said slowly, I was advised to protect my assets. By whom? The attorney asked. Malcolm didn't answer. The judge leaned forward. Answer the question. My mother, Malcolm said. The sound she made then wasn't a gasp. It was closer to a hiss. That's not, she began. Mrs. Brooks, Judge Whitaker said calmly. You will not speak again without being addressed. She fell silent. Naomi's attorney nodded once and continued. Mr. Brooks, he said, were you aware at the time that your wife had contributed unpaid labor to your business? Yes. Did you compensate her? No. Did you list her as a partner? No. Did you benefit from her work? Malcolm looked down. Yes. The admission sat in the air. Judge Whitaker closed the file in front of him. Ms. Brooks Ellison, he said, turning toward Naomi. I have a question for you. Naomi stood. Yes, Your Honor. Are you seeking spousal support? No. The word surprised people. Even Malcolm looked up. Are you seeking restitution? The judge asked. Naomi considered the question carefully. No, she said. A pause. Then what are you seeking? Judge Whitaker asked. Naomi met his gaze. I'm seeking correction. The judge studied her for a moment. Explain. I entered this marriage as myself, she said. I left my trust separate by choice. I worked without pay by choice. I accepted less by choice. She paused. But I will not leave misrepresented. Judge Whitaker nodded slowly. Understood. He turned back to Malcolm. Mr. Brooks, he said, this court finds that you acted in bad faith. Malcolm's attorney stiffened. You attempted, the judge continued, to conceal marital assets, diminish your spouse's contributions, and expedite separation under false assumptions. He picked up his pen. This court will freeze the transferred funds effective immediately. Malcolm's breath caught. You will submit to a full forensic audit. His mother gripped the bench. And, the judge added, you will return to this court with documentation detailing all benefits derived from your wife's labor. Malcolm stood abruptly. This is insane, he said. She doesn't even want the money. Judge Whitaker looked at him coolly. This isn't about what she wants, he said. It's about what you did. Naomi sat back down. She felt nothing spike. No rush. No vindication. Just the quiet sense of inevitability settling into place. Judge Whitaker struck the gavel lightly. This court will recess. As people stood, Malcolm remained frozen. Naomi rose, collected her bag, and turned toward the aisle. Malcolm spoke then, his voice cracking slightly. Naomi. She stopped. She did not turn. I didn't know, he said. If I had known. She looked at him then. Only once. If you had known, she said calmly, you would have behaved. The words landed without force, without accusation. And that was what broke him. Naomi turned and walked out. Behind her, Malcolm realized something too late. He hadn't lost because she was powerful. He had lost because he had mistaken access for ownership. And now, the system he trusted was no longer protecting him. It was correcting him. The city did not pause for Malcolm Brooks. That was the first thing he noticed when he stepped outside the courthouse after the second recess. The sky was the same dull gray. Traffic moved at the same impatient pace. People crossed streets with their heads down, absorbed in their own private urgencies. Nothing announced his collapse. That, somehow, made it worse. He stood near the base of the courthouse steps, phone pressed to his ear, listening to silence on the other end. He pulled it away, stared at the screen, then tried again. Same result. Straight to nothing. His attorney had left 10 minutes earlier. Not dramatically. No argument. No raised voice. Just a quiet sentence delivered while gathering papers. I'll be stepping away from representation effective immediately. Malcolm hadn't even processed it at first. You can't do that, he'd said. I can, the attorney replied. And I am. No explanation followed. None was needed. Everyone in that building understood what a forensic audit meant when it came paired with a name like Ellison. It meant distance. It meant reputational containment. It meant people stepping back before they were pulled in. Malcolm's mother stood a few feet away now, arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyes darting between passers-by, as if someone might be watching. They can't do this, she muttered. They can't. Her voice had lost its edge. It sounded thin, fragile. Malcolm didn't answer. He was watching Naomi. She stood across the plaza near the curb, speaking quietly with her attorney. Her posture was relaxed, weight shifted slightly to one side, the paper bag resting at her feet like it had always belonged there. Nothing about her suggested urgency or triumph. People passed between them, briefly blocking his view, then moving on. When he finally gathered the nerve to approach her, it felt like crossing a boundary he had never known existed. Naomi, he said again. She turned this time. Fully. Not sharply. Not reluctantly. Just enough to acknowledge him. Yes, she asked. The word was neutral. Professional. As if he were a stranger asking for directions. He swallowed. This doesn't have to go this far, he said. We can talk. We can fix. There is nothing to fix, Naomi replied. Her tone was steady. Not cold. Not cruel. Final. You're doing this because you're angry, he insisted. You want to punish me. Naomi studied him for a moment. Not his face. His posture. The way his shoulders curved inward now, like he was protecting something hollow. The way his eyes kept drifting toward the courthouse doors, as if expecting rescue. I'm not punishing you, she said. I'm correcting the record. That's the same thing, he snapped. No, Naomi replied. Punishment requires intention. Correction requires accuracy. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Something in her expression told him it would be useless. You don't even want the money, he said, grasping for footing. The judge asked you. You said no. So why keep going? Naomi bent and picked up the paper bag. She held it loosely at her side. Because, she said, you tried to erase me. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. You told the court I was nothing, she continued. You let them laugh when I walked out. You believed silence meant surrender. She took a step closer. You don't get to decide who disappears. Malcolm felt his throat tighten. You could stop this, he said. You could end it right now. Naomi nodded once. Yes, she said. I could. She stepped back. But then it wouldn't be true. She turned and walked away, heels clicking softly against stone, leaving Malcolm standing alone with the weight of his own logic collapsing around him. Across the plaza, his mother watched her go. Something inside her finally cracked. This is your fault, she hissed, turning on him. If you had listened to me. He didn't hear the rest. The world had narrowed to a single realization, heavy and unavoidable. Naomi had not come to take. She had come to be seen. And now that she was, there was no version of this story where he walked away intact. 3 days later, Malcolm sat alone in his apartment, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of sirens drifting in through an open window. Boxes lined the walls. Not packed. Abandoned. Documents lay scattered across the table, unopened envelopes stamped with official seals he pretended not to recognize. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart jumped, only to sink again when he saw the name attached. Old contacts. Casual check-ins. People asking questions they didn't want answers to. No invitations. No reassurances. No offers of help. He picked up one envelope and turned it over in his hands. Audit. The word echoed in his mind like a sentence being handed down slowly, deliberately. In another part of the city, Naomi Brooks Ellison sat on a bench near the river, coat pulled tight around her, watching the water move steadily past. She had not gone home. Not yet. There was still one more thing to do, and she knew exactly where it would lead. Malcolm Brooks did not attend the final hearing. No one announced his absence. No one commented on it. The chair at the plaintiff's table remained empty, its surface cleared of papers, its space already beginning to feel unused, like something that belonged to a previous version of the room. Judge Whitaker entered on time. The clerk called the case. Naomi Brooks Ellison rose when addressed, her posture unchanged from the first day. Calm, measured, prepared. She had arrived alone again, paper bag at her feet, envelope tucked neatly under her arm. The same quiet consistency that had unsettled people before now carried weight. Absence, it turned out, was louder than protest. The judge reviewed the file without expression. Pages turned. Notes were checked. The court reporter waited, fingers hovering, ready to record whatever history decided to preserve. "Let the record reflect," Judge Whitaker said, "that Mr. Brooks has been properly notified and has chosen not to appear." He paused. "Proceed." Naomi's attorney stood. There was no performance this time. No persuasion. No urgency. Everything that needed to be said had already been proven. He submitted the final findings of the audit. Unreported transfers. Mischaracterized labor. Deliberate omission. Bad faith strategy. The judge listened, eyes scanning the page with the focus of someone confirming what they already knew. When it was over, he looked at Naomi. "Ms. Brooks Ellison," he said, "this court acknowledges that you did not seek financial redress." Naomi nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "Nevertheless," he continued, "the court is obligated to correct the record." He lifted his pen. "Effective immediately, all disputed transfers are reversed. All mischaracterized contributions are formally recognized." He paused again. "And the findings of bad faith will remain on record." The words settled quietly into the room. No gasp. No reaction. No spectacle. Just permanence. Naomi did not smile. She did not thank anyone. She simply stood, accepted the final documents, and waited as the judge concluded the session. The gavel struck once. Soft. Final. Outside, the courthouse steps were nearly empty. The afternoon light had shifted, stretching shadows across the stone in long, patient lines. Naomi descended slowly, not because she was tired, but because there was no reason to rush anymore. At the bottom, she stopped. She looked back once, not at the building, but at the doors. Nothing followed her out this time. No laughter. No whispers. No applause. Just space. Weeks passed. Malcolm Brooks moved quietly through the city like someone already half absent. His name stopped opening doors. Invitations thinned. Calls went unanswered longer each time until they stopped altogether. He was not ruined in the dramatic sense. There were no headlines. No public reckoning. Just erosion. A board seat quietly reassigned. A partnership that shifted direction. A social circle that recalibrated without explanation. People did not condemn him. They simply adjusted. That was worse. He learned about the final ruling secondhand. A former colleague mentioned it casually over coffee, not looking him in the eye. "They corrected the record," the man said. "Left it there." Malcolm nodded as if it meant nothing. But he understood. Records don't fade. They wait. Naomi Brooks Ellison did not return to the life she'd had before. She didn't reclaim anything publicly. Didn't announce changes. Didn't correct assumptions. She rented a modest place near the river. Walked the same routes every morning. Sat in the same cafe windows without expecting recognition. Her days were quiet. Deliberately so. One afternoon, she passed the courthouse again, not because she needed to, but because the city had arranged it that way. She slowed near the steps, watching people come and go. A young woman exited the building clutching a folder too tightly, eyes fixed ahead, shoulders drawn in. Someone laughed behind her. Softly, confidently. Naomi watched the scene unfold without interference. Then she turned and kept walking. Somewhere inside the courthouse, her name sat in ink where it belonged. Not as a twist, not as a victory, as a correction. And in the city that had once watched her leave with nothing, Naomi Brooks Ellison continued forward, unnoticed, unbothered, and no longer misrepresented. The story didn't end with applause. It ended with accuracy, and that was enough.